Let's go to woke. Love having that. What does it even mean? We're not the ones who are saying that. Trump, as we just said in our last one, is some sort of political Cassandra, always able to identify a lane, calling out Ron DeSantis just months ago and some other Republican politicians for always talking about woke, and he doesn't even know what they mean. Here's what he said.
It's gone sick. And I don't like the term woke because I hear woke, woke, woke. You know, it's like just a term that half the people can't even define it. They don't know what it is.
So funnily enough, Trump actually did use the term woke in Truth just yesterday, but we'll let that slide. On a political level, though, it seems that he might be onto something. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. This is the same thing that you and I identified, Krystal, as well. But it comes from inside several crosstabs of some new polls around whether Republicans are beginning to turn on, quote, wokeness, and what exactly that means to the average voter, and how they might actually turn against it. One of them is actually a quote from an actual voter buried inside this piece. Can we put that, please, up there on the screen? That really does identify what she was talking about. For example, she says, quote, if you don't like what Bud Light did, don't buy it. Then she says, quote, if you don't like what Disney is doing, don't go. That's not the government's responsibility. But then there was even one who talked about book banning. And what they said there, Krystal, was that they both believed, what was it, COVID is a Chinese lab. Okay, do you have the full one in front of you?
So she believes that COVID was not just escape from a lab, but an intentional bioweapon. Yeah. So she's all in on that conspiracy theory. But then in terms of book bans, she says that, it's gone too far, that she lives in Iowa and there's a school district that's close to her. And she says this is like burning books. So voters are complicated.
You gotta love the American
The
voter.
Average voter is very complicated.
Yes. But she loves Trump. So it's one of those where I think that when you put it all together, what we find is that people have very different and varied views as to what you would believe originally from the media. So let's go and put some of these charts that we have up there on the screen. As a Republican, I would rather support a candidate who, quote, will fight woke left corporations, only 38%. Will leave corporations to support whichever they choose, 52%. Okay, interesting. Let's go to the next one there, please. I am a Republican who, quote, supports gay marriage, 50%, opposes gay marriage, 41%. And then the next one there, what we can find is what is more important for a Republican candidate, quote, protecting individual freedoms, 51%, guarding traditional values. So I think when you put those together, I'm not going to toot my own horn, but some of us have been talking about a phenomenon called barstool conservatism for a while, which specifically emphasizes like individual libertarianism in a much more like secular country and environment, which is more opposed to political correctness and to social like transgenderism and CRT than much more so they are than what a traditional 2004 Republican kind of would be. And the more actually that you conflate those two things, the less popular that they are. But I thought it was very interesting to kind of see this very kind of libertarian bent become the prevailing attitude amongst the primary voter as a Republican, not just amongst the individual electorate, but that's overall indicative of a lot of social trends.
It reminds me of the part of the Megyn Kelly, Ron DeSantis interview that we played, where she was challenging him on this exact same thing because he's threatening, obviously he's already embroiled in legal conflict with Disney, but then he's also threatening legal action against Budweiser because of their use of this transgender influencer, and he's like, oh, well, their stock went down and that hurt our pension holders. And Megyn was like, yeah, but you supported the boycott, so aren't you kind of like part of that stock going down? So she was really highlighting this divide within the Republican Party. And even more stark to me is they gave voters in this poll two different flavors of candidate. One that sounds more like the issues that Trump emphasizes and one that sounds more like the issues that DeSantis emphasizes. So they say when presented with a choice between two hypothetical Republican candidates, only 24% of national Republican voters opted for a candidate who focuses on defeating radical woke ideology in our schools, media, and culture over a candidate who focuses on restoring law and order in our streets and at the border. So now does Trump dabble in some of this like woke anti-woke talk as well. Yeah, as Saagar just pointed out, he's out truthing about it this morning. But in terms of the central focus of his campaign, you would say it's more about the border. It's more about law and order. That's always been sort of like his mantra ever since 2016. He's been leaning into that particular line of policy attack. Whereas DeSantis, I mean, he threw all in on the woke thing. I kind of understand why he did it, even though it obviously has ended up being a poor choice, because the Republican Party, in a lot of ways, especially the base, is divided along certain issues, certain economic issues, Ukraine war, you know, even in terms of like style and affect. The coalition that Ron DeSantis is trying to pull together is, in fairness, I think a very difficult coalition to pull together. It includes people who, you know, really despise Trump at this point and don't want anything to do with him. And he also has to try to win over some people who still really like Trump and, you know, but maybe might be open to a different candidate. To try to pull that group of people together is very hard. So the lane that he thought might unite the entire Republican coalition is on being anti-woke. So he's really made that his bread and butter, even leaving aside, you know, some of the things that he did earlier on in his gubernatorial career, certainly things that he did when he was in Congress. But it's just, I think there's been dramatic overreach, number one. Number two, it has rubbed up against this live and let live ideology that runs very deep, not just within the Republican Party, but within the American public in general, where it's like, listen, you're an adult, go do what you want to do. Let's, like, you know, make your choices as long as they don't interfere with me. I really could care less. And also rubs up against this traditional conservative position of like, hey, businesses get to make their own decisions within their own companies. It's not the governor's job.
I actually think it's generational. I think there's something very generational to it, where a lot of boomer Republican voters are much more libertarian-minded in general. They came up in the Reagan era. They became Reagan Democrats. You know, they were Democrats who then voted for Reagan, kind of been Republicans ever since. The activist base, specifically of younger Republicans, who are the most pro-DeSantis people I think you will mostly find out there, are very much kind of on board the whole, like, we got to use the government and weaponize it against corporations who we don't really agree with on a cultural level. So I think that because DeSantis is what, he's like 44 or something like that, of his cohort of Republicans, he's going to be in more of that like-minded group. So there's something to that. There's also, in general, who are the people who are professional who don't like Trump? You have two sets. You basically have the group I just talked about who thinks Trump is too friendly to like gay interests and was suckered up to Caitlyn Jenner and didn't use the power of the government to actually transform conservative. And then you got more like January 6th is the worst thing that ever happened in American history, like Liz Cheney types. So if you're a DeSantis, pro-DeSantis person, kind of the professional Republican apparatus, well, you're really going to be in that first category that I talked about. And those are the type of people who I can tell you from personal experience, I know many of the people who work for him, many of the people who are on his campaign and who backed him from the beginning, they very much fall into the category that I just described. So I think it could be a staff-driven thing. But listen, I mean, DeSantis also probably believes it. So you can't take that away from him either.
I don't know what DeSantis believes. I think he's just, I mean, he's shape-shifted enough in his career that I just really kind of feel like he positions himself wherever he thinks is advantageous, is my view. But I see it as less generational and more class-based.
Oh, sure.
If you look at, I mean, if you look within the polls consistently, Ron DeSantis does better among college-educated Republicans than he does among non-college educated Republicans who are still all in for Trump. And it makes sense. I mean, we see a similar divide on the Democratic side where it's like, you know, more affluent, college-educated liberals. They're more concerned with the cultural value set. And the working class, you know, multiracial working class base that still supports Democrats, they are more concerned with bread and butter issues like, hey, how am I gonna be able to pay the bills at the end of the month, and healthcare, et cetera, and unions. So you see a similar divide. The issue says isn't obviously the same on the Republican side, but you see a kind of similar divide where if you were non-college educated and you think that immigrants are a real threat to your sort of livelihood and they're depressing your wages, et cetera, and you're worried about like safety in your community, like these are very kitchen table bread and butter issues. They're much more closely aligned with a sort of material set of values than if you are college educated and you're doing pretty well in this world and you've, you know, you got your house and you got your family and you're doing all right, then maybe can afford to worry about like what Bud Light is doing with their marketing spend and what's going on in the schools, in the, you know, college education system and what the media is doing, et cetera. It's a more sort of luxury set of priorities that you're able to hold if your material needs are already met. So I see it as more of a class divide than really a generational or even really ideological divide.
No, I think there's probably two elements to that. I mean, all the people I talked about kind of before about the generational thing, those people are all very highly educated. And they're all, you know, it takes an interesting breed to kind of be highly educated and to come through the elite, you know, system and also still turn out kind of on the other side. Usually there's a degree of contrarianism. And also it can be a very hardening experience. I could tell you from personal experience. So I do understand, I think, that cohort well, specifically because I came up with them throughout Washington and have watched them kind of with curiosity as they branch out between Trump, DeSantis, and then like Tim Scott people. There really are only the three genders, I guess, in Republican politics. So those are kind of where people generally fall. But overall, I do think it is clear that that college-educated group clearly really isn't as touch as they would like to think with the mean Republican voter as to what animates them and to why they are all voting or very likely to vote Trump in the first place.
Yeah, and also it's super online. That's the other piece. That's why it hasn't even translated into DeSantis winning college-educated voters. It's, you know, a minority group of college-educated voters. It is a super, you know, online fixation that there's a lot of energy around, but doesn't necessarily translate into a majority of the base. Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.